If you found your own name printed on a boarding pass inside your husband's luggage for a flight that took off a month ago to a city you've never visited, on the exact night your sister vanished, what would you do? You'd probably think it was a mistake. I thought so too, until I noticed the bloodstains smeared across the seat assignment. The metallic teeth of the zipper gave way with a sharp, harsh rasp that seemed unnaturally loud in the quiet bedroom. I reached into Julian's leather travel bag to pull out his unwashed shirts, smelling the familiar blend of his sandalwood cologne and stale hotel air. But deep inside the silk lining of the hidden interior pocket, my fingers brushed against something stiff, crisp, and cold. I pulled it out expecting a forgotten receipt or a business card, but found myself staring at a glossy airline ticket dated exactly 32 days ago. My breath hitched as my eyes scanned the bold lettering. Passenger, Elena Vance. Destination Zurich. Seat 14A. My stomach dropped into a cold abyss because 32 days ago I hadn't left our apartment, nor had I stepped foot near an airport. I was supposed to be recovering in a hospital bed after the car crash that took my sister's life. So why did my husband have a boarding pass stamped with my name and a bloodied thumbprint over the gate code? At 32, I had built my entire life on precision, order, and control, working as a senior conservator restoring fragile, centuries-old manuscripts where a single careless touch could destroy history forever. That same meticulous nature made me a quiet, observant woman who preferred the safety of dusty archives over unpredictable crowds, a trait my husband Julian had always claimed to cherish. We had been married for 6 years, living in a beautifully renovated brownstone funded by my late father's estate, a life that appeared serene and enviable from the outside. Yet beneath my quiet exterior lived a deep, suffocating fear of betrayal and loss, rooted in the sudden death of my father 3 years ago, and reinforced by my younger sister Clara's wild, reckless lifestyle. Julian was my anchor, the pragmatic, devoted financial analyst who held me together when my world fractured, or at least that was the story I had told myself every single day, until I noticed the faint scent of expensive lavender perfume clinging to the edge of that blood-marked paper. I stood frozen beside the king-sized bed, listening to the rhythmic hum of the shower running in the adjoining bathroom, my pulse hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. The ticket wasn't just a physical impossibility, it was a ghost from a night I had been trying to forget for over a month. On the night of March 14th, according to official police reports and Julian's own tearful testimony, Clara had taken my car without permission, crashed into a ravine 2 miles from our cabin, and her body had been swept away by the raging river currents. I had been found miles away, unconscious in the passenger seat of Julian's parked SUV, with a severe concussion that erased every memory of those fatal hours. Yet here was a physical record stating that while I was allegedly lying in an ICU bed with IV lines taped to my arms, someone using my identity had checked through Security Gate 4 at JFK International Airport, and as the bathroom door creaked open, sending a cloud of warm steam into the bedroom, I scrambled to hide the ticket in my pocket, wondering if the man stepping out with a towel wrapped around his waist was my savior or my sister's killer. Julian smiled, his damp, dark hair falling casually over his forehead, his dark blue eyes crinkling at the corners with the familiar, comforting affection that had always made me feel safe. He stepped toward me, extending his arms for a hug, but as he pulled me against his chest, I felt a sudden, unnatural rigidity in his posture, a momentary hesitation that lasted no longer than a heartbeat before he kissed the top of my head. He asked if everything was all right, his voice smooth and untroubled, but his eyes darted subtly past my shoulder toward his unzipped luggage on the bed. I forced a faint, practiced smile, attributing my pale face to a headache, watching as his hands casually swept over the bag, zipping the interior pocket closed with a quick, deliberate motion that proved he knew precisely what was missing. When he turned his back to hang his jacket, I caught sight of his reflection in the vanity mirror, a cold, calculating expression that wiped away all traces of warmth, leaving me to wonder if the man I shared a bed with had been drugging my morning coffee for the past month. My hands trembled as I locked myself in the home office under the pretense of finishing a client's restoration report, immediately pulling out my laptop to dig into our shared banking accounts. If a ticket had been purchased in my name, there had to be a digital footprint, a transaction, or a confirmation email buried somewhere in the family records. As I navigated through the encrypted folder where Julian managed our family trust, the trust left behind by my father, worth millions, which was scheduled to transfer entirely to me on my 33rd birthday in just 2 weeks, I noticed a series of massive wire transfers executed on March 14th. Over $400,000 had been moved out of the trust account into an offshore entity registered in the Cayman Islands under a shell company called Aegis Holdings. My chest tightened as I clicked on the authorization document, expecting to see Julian's signature as the power of attorney, but instead found my own digital signature stamped beside a copy of my passport, accompanied by a notary stamp belonging to Marcus Vance, my cousin and the primary administrator of our family's legal affairs. The realization sent a wave of nausea crashing over me. Marcus was not just my cousin. He was the lawyer who had urged me to sign a stack of standard estate updates while I was still heavily medicated in the hospital following the crash. I grabbed my phone, my fingers flying across the screen, to dial Marcus's private line, determined to demand an explanation for the offshore transfers and the fraudulent notary stamp. He picked up on the third ring, his tone sharp and hurried, background noise suggesting he was driving through heavy rain. When I asked him directly about Aegis Holdings and the March 14th transfers, there was a sudden, heavy silence on the line, broken only by the rhythmic scraping of his windshield wipers. When he finally spoke, his voice lowered to a tense whisper, warning me that I was asking questions that could destroy everything, before revealing that Julian hadn't been working late at his firm on the night of the crash. He had been meeting with Clara in secret at a remote motel on the outskirts of town. The call disconnected abruptly with a sharp click, leaving me staring at the darkened screen while my mind reeled from the sudden collision of lies. Why would Julian be meeting Clara in secret, hours before she allegedly stole my car and died in a ravine? Clara had been the black sheep of the family, constantly borrowing money, struggling with addiction, and accusing Julian of controlling my life, yet now it appeared they were tied together by secret meetings and missing millions. I remembered the bloodstain on the boarding pass, a faint brownish smudge shaped like a thumbprint, and suddenly remembered that Clara had a distinct scar running through her right thumb from a childhood accident with broken glass. I stood up from my desk, determined to search Julian's private wall safe behind the mahogany bookshelf, but as I pulled back the false panel, I found the door already slightly ajar, revealing an empty interior except for a small, leather-bound diary with a faded velvet cover that belonged entirely to my sister. My fingers shook as I opened Clara's diary, the familiar slanted handwriting filling the pages with frantic, chaotic entries written in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. Page after page detailed her growing terror of Julian, claiming he was intercepting her mail, monitoring her phone calls, and slowly poisoning my food to make me appear mentally unstable so he could gain full control of the family trust before my 33rd birthday. But as I flipped to the final entry, written on the morning of March 14th, the narrative took a horrifying, incomprehensible turn. Clara wrote that she had discovered Julian wasn't acting alone, but was working directly under the orders of someone within my own inner circle, someone who had promised him half the inheritance in exchange for making me disappear forever. Attached to the last page with a rusty paperclip was a folded piece of paper, a copy of a blood test result showing high levels of synthetic sedatives in my system, dated 3 days before the crash, signed by Dr. Harrison, my personal physician, and my father's lifelong best friend. A cold sweat broke out across my back as the walls of my comfortable life seemed to close in around me, revealing a web of deception where every person I trusted was a spider spinning threads to trap me. I tucked Clara's diary inside my sweater, my heart hammering a furious rhythm against my ribs as I heard footsteps approaching down the hallway. The door handle jiggled, then turned slowly, and Julian stepped into the office, his expression unreadable, holding 2 glasses of sparkling water with sliced lemons floating near the rim. He offered one to me with a gentle, patient smile that now felt like the mask of a stranger, asking if I was feeling any better after taking a break from my work. I took the glass, forcing my fingers to stay steady, watching the tiny bubbles rise to the surface, realizing that if Clara's diary was accurate, this innocent glass of water contained the very chemical designed to erase my memory once again. "You look exhausted, sweetheart," Julian said softly, stepping closer until he was standing just inches away, his shadow looming over my desk in the dim afternoon light. He reached out, his hand gently tucking a stray lock of hair behind my ear with a gesture that felt suffocatingly intimate, his eyes searching my face with an intensity that made my skin crawl. I managed to set the glass down on the edge of the desk without taking a sip, claiming my stomach was too upset for cold drinks, and watched a flicker of irritation flash across his features before he quickly smoothed it over. He pulled his hand back, resting it casually in his pocket, but as he did, his elbow brushed against the desk lamp, knocking a stack of papers to the floor. including a folder containing the printouts of the wire transfers to Aegis Holdings. We both bent down at the same moment to pick them up, and as his eyes locked onto the printed document with my forged signature, his friendly demeanor evaporated into a cold, terrifying silence that filled the room like toxic gas. "Where did you get this, Elena?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave, devoid of any affection or warmth, as he slowly stood up, holding the papers between his long fingers. I backed away until my spine hit the edge of the heavy wooden bookshelf, my mind racing to construct a plausible lie, but the terrified look in my eyes betrayed me before I could speak a word. Julian didn't yell or raise his hand. Instead, he methodically folded the paper into precise, neat squares, slipping it into his pocket with a chillingly calm demeanor that was far more frightening than rage. He told me that I was confusing myself again, that the head trauma from the crash was causing me to hallucinate bad intentions in the people who loved me most, and that he was going to call Dr. Harrison to bring over a stronger sedative to help me sleep. Before I could move or protest, he walked out of the room, locking the heavy oak door from the outside with a sharp, definitive click of the brass key. Trapped inside my own office, panic threatened to overwhelm my senses, but the instinct for survival took over, driving me toward the large bay windows overlooking the quiet, rain-slicked street below. The drop to the garden terrace was nearly 15 feet, far too dangerous to jump without breaking a limb, but a thick copper drainage pipe ran down the side of the brick wall, right beside the window frame. I unlocked the window latch, pushed the heavy glass upward, and stepped out onto the narrow stone sill, cold raindrops immediately soaking through my clothes and blinding my vision. I grabbed the cold metal pipe, sliding down step by step, my hands scraping against the rough brick until my feet hit the wet soil of the flower bed with a muffled thud. I ran through the side gate without looking back, ducking into the dark alleyway just as Dr. Harrison's dark blue sedan pulled into our driveway, its headlights cutting through the foggy rain like the searching eyes of a predator. I needed answers, and the only person left who held the keys to the legal documents was Marcus Vance, my cousin whose signature had authorized the creation of the offshore account. I walked 4 blocks through the pouring rain to the local train station, keeping my hood low to hide my face, every passing shadow making me flinch with the paranoia that Julian or Dr. Harrison was following me. Using cash from my coat pocket, I bought a one-way ticket to Marcus's private law firm downtown, determined to confront him before he realized I had escaped from the house. When I arrived at the sleek glass tower, the building was nearly empty for the weekend, save for a night security guard who recognized me and allowed me access to the executive elevator without asking questions. I stepped into the carpeted hallway of the 34th floor, the silence heavy and eerie, and made my way toward Marcus's corner office, noticing that the door was cracked open and a sliver of warm light was spilling onto the dark floorboards. I pushed the door open quietly, my shoes making no sound against the thick rug, preparing myself to demand the truth about the forged notary stamp and the Aegis Holdings account. But as I rounded the large mahogany desk, my breath caught in my throat and a silent scream choked in my chest. Marcus was sitting motionless in his leather executive chair, his head slumped backward, his eyes wide open and lifeless, staring blankly at the ceiling. A dark, sticky pool of blood had gathered on the glass top of his desk, seeping from a single entry wound near his temple, and resting right beside his lifeless hand was an open envelope stamped with the logo of Zurich Airport. I stepped closer, my heart pounding against my ribs, and picked up the paper resting beneath his fingers. It was an official passenger manifest for the March 14th flight, listing the name Elena Vance, but attached to the document was a high-resolution security camera photograph of the woman who had actually boarded the plane using my passport, a woman with my exact height, wearing my coat, but whose face, captured clearly under the bright airport lights, belonged to my sister Clara, who was supposed to be dead at the bottom of a river. My mind shattered under the weight of the revelation as the puzzle pieces rearranged themselves into a terrifying new reality that defied everything I had believed for the past month. Clara wasn't the victim of a tragic accident. She was alive, she had stolen my identity, and she had used my passport to board a flight to Switzerland on the very night she was supposedly swept away by raging currents. But if Clara was alive and had fled the country with millions from the trust, whose body had been recovered from the river, and why had Marcus been murdered in his office just moments before I arrived? I reached out to touch the document, my fingers trembling wildly, when the sudden sound of heavy leather shoes echoing down the marble hallway outside signaled that Marcus's killer hadn't left the building. They were coming back into the room. I scrambled behind a heavy velvet curtain hanging beside the floor-to-ceiling windows, pressing my back against the glass, holding my breath as the office door swung wider open. Through the gap in the fabric, I watched in sheer horror as Dr. Harrison walked into the room, wearing a dark raincoat glistening with water, carrying a small leather medical bag in one hand and a silenced pistol in the other. He didn't look surprised to see Marcus dead. Instead, he calmly walked over to the desk, opened his bag, and pulled out a small glass vial and a pre-filled syringe, setting them neatly beside the lifeless attorney. He began searching through Marcus's desk drawers with practiced efficiency, muttering under his breath about a missing flash drive, when his phone began to ring loudly, the sharp ringtone cutting through the silent room like a knife blade. He answered it on speaker, and Julian's agitated voice filled the office. "Did you handle Marcus? Elena escaped from the house, and I think she's heading your way." Dr. Harrison let out a cold, soft chuckle that sent chills down my spine, adjusting his gold-rimmed glasses with his gloved fingers as he stared down at Marcus's body. "Marcus is taken care of, Julian, staged perfectly as a suicide brought on by guilt over his embezzlement scheme," the doctor said, his tone devoid of any human empathy. "If Elena comes here, I will handle her the same way. After all, 2 tragic deaths in one family will finally allow us to liquidate the rest of the trust without any annoying questions from the probate court." My blood ran cold as I realized that Julian and Dr. Harrison were partners, using Marcus as a scapegoat while systematically eliminating anyone who stood between them and my father's multi-million-dollar estate. But just as Dr. Harrison turned toward the velvet curtain to check behind the window, his foot brushed against my discarded wet umbrella on the floor, revealing my presence in the room. He lunged forward, ripping the curtain aside with violent force, his face twisting into a cruel smile as he pointed the silenced pistol directly at my chest. I didn't hesitate. Driven by pure adrenaline, I grabbed a heavy bronze paperweight from the side table and swung it with all my strength, striking him hard across the wrist. The gun went flying across the slick floor, skidding beneath the heavy mahogany desk, and Dr. Harrison stumbled backward with a cry of pain, clutching his broken joint. I bolted past him toward the hallway, my heart hammer throbbing in my ears, hearing his heavy footsteps giving chase behind me as he yelled for the building guards, whom he had clearly bribed to lock down the floor. I slammed my weight against the heavy emergency exit door, bursting into the concrete stairwell, taking the stairs 3 at a time in a desperate bid to reach the main lobby before he could recover his weapon. I flew out of the building's side entrance into the pouring rain, running blindly through the dark downtown streets until my lungs burned and my legs felt like lead. I needed to go somewhere safe, somewhere no one would think to look for me, but in a city where my husband, my doctor, and my lawyer were all part of a conspiracy to kill me. Trust was a luxury I could no longer afford. I remembered the small, leather-bound diary I had stuffed into my sweater pocket before escaping the house, pulling it out under the flickering light of a street lamp to reread the cryptic entries written by Clara. As I flipped through the pages with wet fingers, a small, hidden pocket in the back cover tore open, revealing a micro SD memory card wrapped in plastic and a folded note written in Clara's handwriting that read, "If you are reading this, Elena, I am already gone, but the truth about Father's death is on this card. He didn't die of a heart attack." My breath caught in my throat as a wave of dizziness washed over me, the rainy street spinning around me as the horrific truth began to unfurl its dark wings. My father hadn't died of natural causes. He had been murdered 3 years ago, and the very people who had cared for me afterward were the ones who had engineered his death to gain control of his fortune. Clara had discovered the truth months ago, but instead of coming to me, she had used the information to blackmail Julian and Dr. Harrison, demanding millions in exchange for her silence before fleeing to Switzerland under my name to escape their retribution. She hadn't been trying to save me. She had used me as a decoy, leaving me behind to take the fall for her fraudulent transfers while she lived in luxury off my inheritance. I clutched the memory card tight in my fist, realization dawning upon me that if I wanted to survive, I had to stop running from the monsters in my life and start hunting them down. I walked to a 24-hour internet cafe tucked away in an underground station, paying cash for an isolated terminal in the back corner of the dimly lit room. I inserted the micro SD card into the reader, my hands cold as marble, and opened the single video file stored inside, dated 3 years prior, the night my father passed away in his private study. The footage was recorded from a hidden security camera mounted inside the bookshelf, showing my father sitting at his desk, arguing heatedly with someone sitting across from him whose back was turned to the lens. As the argument escalated, the person stood up, revealing their face clearly under the desk lamp. It wasn't Julian, and it wasn't Dr. Harrison or Marcus. The person who had systematically poisoned my father's tea, watched him gasp for air, and calmly retrieved his master key to the family trust was a woman with my sister's face. But as she turned toward the camera, I saw the undeniable truth. Clara had an identical twin mark behind her left ear, a mark that only my mother had possessed before her own death years ago, meaning Clara wasn't my sister at all, but my half-sister born from an affair my father had tried to bury. The revelation shattered the final remnants of my innocence, exposing a web of generational lies that had poisoned my entire family from the inside out. Clara wasn't just a greedy sibling. She was the product of my father's hidden past, raised in secrecy, driven by a lifelong rage to claim what she believed was rightfully hers by blood and by force. Julian hadn't been manipulating Clara. Clara had been manipulating Julian, seducing him, using him to gain access to the financial codes, and leaving him behind with Dr. Harrison to clean up the mess while she escaped to Zurich with the stolen millions. But as I watched the video replay the tragic moment of my father's death, I noticed a subtle detail in the bottom corner of the frame. A third person standing in the shadows of the study, holding a briefcase, calmly taking notes as my father collapsed to the floor. I zoomed in on the shadow, enhancing the contrast until the face of the third witness emerged from the darkness with terrifying clarity. It was Dr. Harrison, standing beside a younger, unkempt version of Julian, both of them working as Clara's paid accomplices from the very beginning. They hadn't betrayed Clara, they were executed her grand design, and the car crash on March 14th hadn't been an accident or a botched escape. It was a staged execution meant to eliminate me, the legitimate heir, so Clara could assume my life permanently in Europe. The reason the boarding pass had a bloodied thumbprint was because Clara had forced me into that car, knocked me unconscious, and used my blood to bypass the biometric verification at the private aviation terminal before leaving me to die in the ravine. But I hadn't died. I had survived with amnesia, forcing them to improvise a new plan to finish the job before my 33rd birthday triggered the automatic audit of the estate. A cold, calm resolve settled over me, replacing the fear that had consumed me all evening with a razor-sharp clarity I had never felt before. I downloaded the video file onto 3 separate encrypted drives, sending one directly to the state prosecutor's office, one to the Federal Fraud Division, and keeping the third in my pocket as my weapon of absolute destruction. I pulled out my phone, dialing Julian's direct number for the first time since escaping the house, knowing he was sitting in our living room with Dr. Harrison, desperately trying to figure out where I had gone. He answered on the first ring, his voice tense, trying to sound relieved. "Elena, thank God you called. Where are you? We're so worried about your safety." "I'm at the Grand Fountain in Central Park, Julian," I said, my voice steady, dripping with artificial vulnerability that sounded convincingly broken. "I'm scared. I don't know what's real anymore, and I have Marcus's envelope with me. Please come alone and help me understand." I heard a muffled whisper on his end of the line as he conferred with Dr. Harrison before he replied with fake warmth, promising he would be there in 15 minutes to protect me and bring me home. I hung up the phone without another word, stepping out into the cold rain, making my way not toward Central Park, but toward the police precinct located 3 blocks away from the meeting spot, where a team of federal agents was already waiting for my arrival based on the evidence I had transmitted. 15 minutes later, from the dark interior of an unmarked police surveillance van parked across the street from the fountain, I watched through high-powered binoculars as Julian and Dr. Harrison arrived together, stepping out of their vehicle with weapons hidden beneath their long coats. They walked toward the empty stone fountain, scanning the shadows with desperate, predatory eyes, entirely unaware that the entire square was surrounded by undercover federal officers waiting for my signal. I held the radio receiver in my hand, watching the 2 men who had destroyed my family, stolen my life, and tried to erase my existence standing under the yellow streetlights like trapped animals. I gave the signal, and within seconds, blinding spotlights cut through the darkness, sirens blared from every intersection, and dozens of armed officers swarmed the square, ordering Julian and Dr. Harrison to drop their weapons and get onto the wet pavement. As the plastic flex cuffs were clicked tightly around Julian's wrists, he turned his head toward the surveillance van, his face pale and contorted with disbelief as he caught a glimpse of me standing beside the lead investigator in the doorway. I stepped down onto the wet asphalt, walking slowly toward him, stopping just inches away from where he lay pressed against the cold stone, his arrogant mask completely shattered into pathetic desperation. He opened his mouth to speak, to offer some final lie or desperate plea for mercy, but I simply pulled the blood-stained boarding pass from my pocket, dropping it onto his chest like a feather falling onto a grave. "Your flight has been canceled, Julian," I whispered softly, turning my back on him as the officers dragged him away into the back of a waiting transport vehicle. 2 weeks later, I stood in the terminal of JFK International Airport, holding a newly issued passport and a single ticket to Zurich, Switzerland, purchased with my own restored funds. The federal investigation had completely dismantled the conspiracy, leading to the arrest of Dr. Harrison and the freezing of all offshore accounts tied to Aegis Holdings, but Clara was still out there, hiding somewhere in the Swiss Alps under my stolen name, believing she had gotten away with murder. I checked through Security Gate 4, walking down the same jet bridge my imposter sister had walked a month prior, feeling no fear, only an unyielding determination to reclaim what was mine. As I took my seat in row 14A, looking out the oval window at the rain-streaked runway below, I opened my purse and pulled out a small handwritten postcard that had arrived at my home office just yesterday, bearing a Swiss postmark and a single sentence written in familiar slanted handwriting. "I've been waiting for you, sister." Final moral: tragedy often forces us to look for monsters in the shadows, but the most dangerous predators are always the ones who sit at our dinner tables, drink from our glasses, and kiss us goodnight while quietly planning our downfall. Trust is fragile, but truth is absolute, and no matter how deeply a lie is buried under money, power, or stolen identities, the weight of forgotten details will eventually drag every secret into the light. Call to action. What would you have done if you discovered that your entire life was a carefully constructed trap built by the people you loved most? Would you have fled the country, or would you have stayed to hunt down the truth no matter the cost? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories where nothing is ever as it seems.